Today's discussion is about the movie 1984, based on George Orwell's 1984. I got the book right here. This book is very good. I actually read it in high school in 1984, and I remember thinking George Orwell was off. I said, it's 1984 and we don't have cameras everywhere. We don't have this kind of society today. Little did I know, years later, I'd have cameras everywhere. Can't scratch your nose without somebody knowing about it. The book was written in 1949, and it takes place in a post-atomic war dystopia of 1984. So since it was written in 1949, 1984 was the future. But for us, in 2016, 1984 is now the past. The movie I watched was the first version, made in 1956. It's an older one, but it was good. So I highly recommend that you watch this movie, but I recommend even more that you read this book if you haven't yet. Easily get it at the library, Amazon, borrow it from somebody. I don't know what kids are reading today in high school. They may not be reading the same things that in our age group have read for school. It might be a whole different list of books that they're reading today. I don't know. Our kids read everything, especially Willow, so we have all the classics on our bookshelf. So in this movie, there's a middle-aged man, Winston Smith. He's living in this crappy, futuristic, post-atomic world, totalitarian world, actually. In the movie, he calls himself a historian, but basically his job is to change the history books to what the government wanted, and his job was to remove names so that from the history book, so it's as if they never existed. I thought it was interesting how they were removing names, changing what happened in history to what the government wanted. So it makes you wonder what we've learned in school is true or not true. Some say it is or isn't, but the funny thing is, for a fact, I know what we learned in school when back in the 70s is now being said it's different. Not everything, but how things happened or who did what. So was what I learned in the 70s the truth, or is the rewritten version the truth? How do you really know? It makes you think, what exactly is the truth? So what I thought was interesting in the movie, what everybody knew to be the truth, or what Winston knew to be the truth, was supposedly not, according to the government. The government would say, the truth is what we tell you it is. So then, a handful of people start believing things, and then more and more people will start believing in what they were told, and then next thing you know, everybody believes this one thing, but is it the truth? Now everybody's confused, aren't they? I'll tell you a true story, and I know I've mentioned it over and over in the past just because it's part of my family's history. I have to keep an open mind to everything, and everything from history to religions to people's views, because it's very difficult to pinpoint what is right, what's wrong. I feel in my heart what's right and wrong, but I try not to dismiss what people have to say. My mom is a survivor of the Spanish Civil War that took place in Spain. It took place from 1936 to 1939. My grandfather was murdered. My mom was telling me how the soldiers just came and told everybody to jump in the back of these trucks, and they took them away to Malaga, Spain, her little village, and they took everything that they had and owned. They were left with nothing. They ended up in Malaga with the sea on fire because of the bombs. Franco was the one who took over and became the dictator of Spain at this time, and he was friends with Hitler. He had my grandfather shot, along with many other soldiers, and many women and children were also shot and killed and thrown into a big hole. When the war ended in 1939, people think, well, the war has ended and there was peace. That's not what happened. Franco kept rounding up people, arresting them, and they were being murdered or tortured or whatever for many years after that. He stayed in power until 1975. He died finally from just old age, and that's when I went to Spain in 1976 for the first time with my mother and two brothers. But I had found out, actually just recently, that all these years that the Spanish Civil War is talked very little in school. They don't put much of it into their curriculum, but from what I understand, that's the case. And the reasoning behind it was the government would say that they were trying to forget about what happened because they said it was both sides' fault, the Republicans and the nationalists. Franco was a nationalist. My grandfather was Republican, and they were afraid if they talked about it and put it in the books that it would create another civil war. So I don't know if they were just trying to hide what they did, what Franco's regime did, or if they truly did want to prevent another civil war, or both. So you could think about that and what you think. I remember how my mother said how they had the salutes like this, like they did in Nazi Germany, how they did in Nazi Germany. And if you didn't keep your arm up, you'd be whipped, shot, or punished in some way. So even the smallest of children had to keep those arms up as the soldiers went by, and they were told that they had they were totally told what everything that they could and could not do. Just like in the movie 1984, where you see Big Brother's posters everywhere, his face, that he's always watching you. It was the same during this time. Franco's face was everywhere on these posters. Same with Hitler, and same with Mussolini and other dictators. You'll see that their faces are plastered on the wall everywhere, and it's just to let you know they're watching you at all times. And this was before internet and cameras and surveillance cameras. You can imagine the fear they had. And today, especially the Americans, we don't think much of it. So there's cameras everywhere. It's part of our life now. But I never thought in a million years I'd see the amount of cameras I see today that are on every street corner, bank, post office, office building. I'm just, it makes you think, that you're being watched. I do believe in privacy, but I don't know if there's any left. There's cameras even on people's houses. Now, here's the thing. There's pros and cons to this type of technology. One can argue cameras can deter crime because criminals know these cameras are on them and they could be seen, so they can't just go up to a building and rob somebody without being caught, so they have to try extra hard to try to do their criminal acts. Even on houses, criminals are caught because of cameras. The cameras on street corners can tell who caused the accident or who hit somebody and ran, so you can catch them later. So you could see the quandary that we're in, how technology can be so helpful, but at the same time it takes your rights away. So what's more important, security or your privacy? Can we have both? Oh, that's a deep topic there. That's a deep subject to think about. I would really love to hear your thoughts. I can understand both sides. I personally like my privacy. I'd rather not have all those cameras everywhere. But I can understand where people who've experienced the crime, and for example, when I was robbed at my mom's grocery store and my brother, we were watching the store, and unfortunately that day we did not have the gun that we normally carried. It was like a convenience store. This is back in the 80s. And we had two guys walk in. I've told the story before. I'll tell it again for those who haven't seen it. They walked in. One guy stood by the door. I didn't even notice him at first. All I noticed is one guy coming around the corner, and both my brother and I were behind the counter. He came around the corner, and I started walking up to him. He wasn't very tall. I'm 5'8", and he was maybe 5'4". So he came around the corner, like coming behind the counter, and I was like, "You can't come back here." And he put a knife up to my throat. And I'm like, oh man, okay. I'm thinking, can I take this guy on? how old was I? Like 18, 19 years old. My brother's 6'4". But then we turned, and his partner, this guy's partner, says, "I'm gonna effing blow your head off." And he had his hand under his coat, and I couldn't tell if he had a gun and he was hiding it because he was watching the door, or if he had the gun, or if he was faking and he didn't have a gun. We didn't want to take a chance that he had a gun because we'd be dead if he did. Now if he didn't, but you can't take that chance. We didn't want to take that chance. It wasn't that important. They were so doped up, drugged up, and they took the money, took cigarettes and some beer, and off they went. And unfortunately, we couldn't identify them properly because they looked very similar to several other people that were on the lineup. Now, if we had a camera, a surveillance camera, they probably could have had a better description by seeing them right on the camera. We could have caught them, and that would have been the end of it. So I do understand both sides of the story here. Now, the only way to have 100% privacy is if you're off the grid, completely off the grid. And even then, I don't know. In the movie, Winston, at this one scene, Winston's friend came over with his teenage daughter, and she was play acting like, "I'm here to arrest you," or I don't remember exactly what she said, but it reminded me of the Youth Brigade. I think that's what they were called in Nazi Germany, how they were like brainwashed that you were here to support the government, and they were more important than your family or friends or anybody else. And I also had another experience with that in real life, where I had a roommate from Romania, and she was telling me how people would turn each other in for small things, little things. So they would turn them in to get money or food. And like in 1984, and Big Brother made people's lives pretty miserable. So you were just barely surviving. So if you followed the rules, they'd make it a little easier for you. They would do things for you. And that's how it was in Romania for my friend. And she was actually my roommate like 30 years ago. She said, cousins, your own brother would turn you in for something so they can get that extra money because their life was they were hungry, or they just didn't have light, or whatever the case was. They just miserable. So any little extra would make their lives bearable. And I remember the time that my roommate made this phone call to California. I was living in Ohio. She was making she was making this conversation very short and almost in code. You could tell she couldn't speak freely. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Why are you so worried?" And she says, "Someone could be listening on the phone." I'm like, "What are you talking about? No one's listening to on the phone. We're in the United States of America. It's America. It doesn't happen here." And she was saying how in her country that your phones were tapped or they were listened in, and then you were reported. Who knows what happened to you after that? So again, I was thinking, all right. But then, years later, what was it, 2006? I have the article somewhere. The government comes out and admits to getting information from all these phone companies, Verizon, AT&T, and I don't know what, all the other big phone companies. They all come out and admit that they were gathering information on monitoring people's conversations and giving that information to the government, and stating it was for the safety of our country and the security of our country after 9/11. That reminds me, after 9/11, do you remember? I don't hear it as much, but it was all the time on TV. If you see something, say something. The main thing I remembered in the book, and of course the movie, they had these telescreens, basically 2A TVs, and even in your home, and they were like in the house, in Winston's house, it was like a round ball, like an eye, it looked like an eyeball, and it would scan him, and scanning whatever information he was bringing into the home. In the movie, they even mentioned that he couldn't even write a diary. That was against the law because they didn't want individuality, that it was not good for the state to have people thinking for themselves. People were like staring at these telescreens, and it looks like they were just like being brainwashed. And some will say our TV commercials, TV shows that are programmed out there are to make people think a certain way. But some will argue that you can be brainwashed without you even knowing it, and not the kind of brainwashing woo kind of weird thing, just by seeing things over and over and over until you say, oh, this is normal. Very open to things, but it's gone too far. You know.